doing your taxes for the first time as a young adult can be daunting. I know this. The first time I did mine, I made my dad sit next to me the entire time I was filling out all of my forms. So I think one of the reasons it is so daunting is there's a lot of jargon. And I wanted to ask you, tax girl, about some of this jargon. So to start, what is a W-2?
So a W-2 is the most simple form that you're probably going to receive. The W-2 is the form that your employer would send to you, and you're going to find on that form all of your gross wages, which is how much you should have gotten before Uncle Sam took anything out of it. So your gross wages, you're going to see any taxes that were withheld for federal, state, and local if that's applicable. And this year, more than ever, you're going to be aware of Box 12, which is going to report your health care benefits that were paid on your behalf, if you had any.
And what is a 1099?
In contrast, a 1099 is going to be a form that's issued to you when you received money for working, but not from an employer. So not a regular gig, but maybe if you're a freelancer, if you perform services for different kinds of companies, the 1099 tells you more or less the same information as the W-2, with one glaring exception, which is that you're not going to see any federal taxes withheld because there's no withholding requirement when you work as an independent contractor. So that's why you're going to notice that your tax bill is a little higher if you're a 1099 taxpayer, as opposed to being simply a W-2 employee.
Another form that I've been getting is the 1098-E.
Right.
Can you explain to our viewers what that is?
So most of you who went to college probably get a 1098-E, and the 1098-E is issued from your lender for student loans, and it outlines the amount of student loan interest that you paid during the year, which can be somewhat depressing when you look at the number. The reason that you want to know that number, though, is if you qualify, you can deduct your student loan interest on your tax return. And the really cool thing about it is that you don't have to itemize to claim the deduction. It's actually considered an above-the-line deduction, so you take it right off the top on the front of your tax form. You don't have to itemize your deductions to claim it.
Now, it is a deduction and not a credit, which is something that confused me when I was 22. Can you explain the difference between deductions and credit and why in this case that's important?
In a nutshell, what deductions do is they chip away at your taxable income. So if you have $50,000 in income and $10,000 in deduction, then you have $40,000 of taxable income. So deductions are good. But credits are even better because credits chip away at the actual tax that you owe. So if you owed $5,000 in tax and you had a $1,000 credit, then you only owe $4,000. So if you do the math backwards, you can actually figure out the equivalent deduction for a credit. So for example, if you got a $1,000 credit, if your tax rate was 20%, that's the equivalent of a $5,000 deduction. And that's important, especially for students, because sometimes you're trying to weigh whether or not to take the student loan interest deduction, the tuition and fees deduction, or maybe one of the credits like the American Opportunity Credit, and you're not allowed to double dip, so you want to compare and see which one's the best. And almost always you'll land better if you choose the credit than the deduction.
And then the other thing that I've seen is a 1040 or a 1040 easy, and I didn't know what to do when I saw those two terms.
So you can never go wrong filing a 1040, because the 1040 has every form, every schedule. That's the most inclusive, but it's also the longest, so you don't necessarily want to file it if you don't have to. If you're a W-2 only employee and you're not planning to itemize, so you're not claiming any mortgage interest, you're not claiming any medical deductions, you can claim the 1040-EZ, which is a very, very short return that just asks for a few pieces of information. If you're somewhere in the middle, there's actually another form called a 1040-A that doesn't get nearly enough attention, but it's kind of a hybrid between the 1040 and the 1040-EZ. If you're using software, it'll usually ask you a few questions in the beginning and figure out which one works for you. And if you're using a professional, then obviously you can ask those questions. If you're trying to figure it out yourself on the IRS website, remember that you can never go wrong picking the 1040.
So because all of this can be so complicated, I'm wondering, at what point should I abandon the e-filing system and maybe hire an accountant or someone to actually take me through it in person?
Well, I get asked this question all the time, and usually people say, at what amount of money should I switch over to an accountant? And I think that's the wrong way to look at it, because it's not a certain number of dollars that determines how complicated your return is, but what's on the return. If you're a regular W-2 employee, you probably can manage on your own. However, when things start changing, if you get a new retirement account, if you change jobs, if you get married, you have kids, those kinds of things can significantly change your tax picture. So that's when I would consider getting a tax professional. And then just also, quite frankly, a time value of money situation. If you find yourself, throwing pencils at the ceiling and getting really, really frustrated because you can't do it, maybe there's a value in having somebody else do that for you.